Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for tuning into the Cloud Native FM podcast. Happy February for everyone watching us or listening to me currently. It has been a pleasure while talking to you today on this YouTube channel. We managed to pull together some of wonderful guests on this show because of your continued support and listening and your contribution on this channel is being some awesome. Today I'm actually recording and live streaming 100th episode on this YouTube channel. I started this YouTube channel in 2021 with my first guest from Azure. That's name is Mike Piper, and he's the one who helped me support kick off this journey of is initiating the YouTube channel. I started podcasting on Cloud Native Islamabad, and then I created a new YouTube channel called Cloud Native Podcast that focus more solely on the interviews and the insightful reviews from the people and the community folks who are doing some tremendous work in the Kubernetes, platform engineering, DevOps, software engineering, and developer relations domain. It's been some one hell of a journey. Once again, thank you very much for listening to this channel every week and sharing your reviews, and that give me a dopamine that will continue my journey on the podcast. And today we have a wonderful topic to start off the February, the second month of 2024, and we're speaking about developer relations, its myth and some curtains that already been not actually covered. We're actually speaking to one of the wonderful guests who help us understand the nuances and the new roadmap that required to be a successful in the developer relations domain going forward. Before any further delay, it's been a historic moment. And let me introduce Daniel Bryant. A few words about Daniel. Daniel is also hosting podcast on InfoQ, and his full description can be the independent technical consultant, the news manager at InfoQ, and Emeritus Chair for KOC London. Over to you, Daniel. Once again, it's a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you, Sam, and congratulations first off. 100 episodes, right? That's monumental, right? There's think about the amount of words spoken that would fit into the books that would fill all the shelves. So kudos on that. It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to a good chat. I know we've got a bunch of great questions already flying around. I will just caveat this is just one person's opinions, right? I've built a couple of DevRel teams. I've had some successes. I've had some failures. The successes are all mainly due to my team, right? So fantastic folks. I'm sure I'll name check them as I go along. And if folks have got questions or don't agree with me, that's totally cool as well. Let us know in the comments and we can pick it up on air. We can pick it up afterwards via DMs, or I'm on all the CNCF Slacks, Kubernetes Slacks at Daniel Bryant UK, most of the places. Love chatting to folks, love teaching, love learning.
Yes, absolutely. And Daniel, we have some question ready, but give your perspective how you delve into the DevRel world, how you started this journey, and what are the different developer communities you happen to be involved today and in the past.
Yeah, great question, Sam. And like many folks, I kind of fell into the role, if I'm being honest, right? So I'm a long-time developer. I sort of cut my teeth primarily in the Java space, but was doing a lot of MySQL or SQL in general, doing some JavaScript back in the day. And we are talking prototype and scriptaculous days, showing my age here, right? But 2000s kind of was when all these tools were coming out. So long-time engineer, moved into architecture, moved into operations, but I'd always enjoyed sharing what I'd learned. Do you know what I mean? So very early on in my career, I loved going to meetups in London. It was big back in sort of 2000s. I loved reading books, and I spun up a blog and all these kind of things, right? So I'd always enjoyed just that kind of community vibe. I wanted to be part of a community, and I was super lucky. I think it was late 2000s, early 2010s when I was working in London once again, and I met some amazing folks in the Java community, and that was my first kind of proper taste of helping to build a community, particularly around, at the time, OpenJDK, which was the open source version of Java. Still going strong, and I only played a tiny little part in it, but it was a fantastic learning experience. I've got to name check folks like Manny Sakar, Richard Warburton, Jim Goff, Trisha G. There was Simon Maple. I'm sure folks will recognize some of those names. There was many people that brought me along on that journey. Martin Verberg, Ben Evans, my mentors, really encouraged me all the time to hey, don't just learn stuff, teach it. You'll learn it even better. You'll bring other folks along on the journey. And I did that, and I did meetups, and then moved on to other conferences. Absolutely loved that. And then along the way, I sort of moved more into the product management kind of things. I really enjoyed some of the marketing stuff. And I've been doing DevRel for a number of years, but my boss at the time, I was working for a company called Ambassador Labs. This is like, I don't know, a few years ago now, right? He was like, do you want to spin up a proper DevRel team? And when I looked back, I'd kind of built some DevRel teams when I was at Spectre Labs with Hoverfly. I kind of helped build some of the OpenJDK community around London. And I was like, you know what? Let's give this a try. Let's be a professional DevRel, right? Rather than being a hobby DevRel, let's be a professional DevRel. And I loved it. Great feedback from the community. As the kind of demands in the company got bigger, we brought in more money, we had bigger goals. I built a team out, fantastic folks. I will shout out Didion, Dave, Cindy, Erica, Gabby, as many folks along on the came with me on the journey. And I think we had some successes, we had some sort of losses or whatever, some not so successes. But I really enjoyed being part of this bigger community, not only cloud native, but Java, and then sort of meta level, there's even a DevRel community, which I'm sure we might get into today. But there's the bunch of community Slacks I belong to that are thoroughly beneficial to my career. I've recognized I've kind of found my people there sometimes, right? When you find your tribe, your people. I'm always an engineer at heart, but I definitely identify with the DevRel folks now. And yeah, long-winded answer, but that was kind of my journey into accidental DevRel, and my journey continues. Like I'm doing other stuff now as well, but it's always about computers, always about like programming typically, be it code infrastructure, and it's always about learning and teaching. Oh, I can't hear you, Sam. Is that you're mute?
Yes, thank you. So I'm actually following you for a very long time. I think your work on the Ambassador Lab is really wonderful because
Thank you.
I happen to live in the service mesh world and
Ah,
API
yes.
gateway, seen your blog posted and have some wonderful feedback in there. So I think you have been as one of the person who has been is great to initiate the discussion that is actually being currently in the horizon in the ecosystem as well. And I think like currently when we started Kubernetes is 2024, 2014, and then going into the 2018 and the KubeCon becoming a
Yeah,
big
yeah.
thing, that the companies is actually pushing the boundaries beyond the Kubernetes and making open source project a lot. And that's where you need to build a community because a collaborative wisdom and collaborative learning is essential for a product and plus for the organization who delving and investing in the open source realm as well. So I think we can start off. Why do developers join communities?
Yeah, speaking of my own experience, I think you want to be part of something bigger. Do you know what I mean? I remember when I was like, again, showing my age, like reading Java books, I was like, this is cool. I'm learning about Java. But when I started meeting other folks, online and in person that were doing the same thing, like I just, there's a social aspect to it. Even though I'm definitely, or I identify as an introvert, right? I like just, coding away sometimes, right? I still like the social interactions. Do you know what I mean? Maybe not all the time, but I really enjoyed being with people that had similar interests, similar goals. And the biggest thing for me is they often pushed me. I think a lot of us join communities because we want to get better. We see Kelsey Hightower and we're like, I want to be like Kelsey one day, right? How do I become like Kelsey? I join communities and people lift you up. They give you feedback. They give you, new skills. They push and poke you and push you in different directions, right? So I think it's just human nature. We are social animals, even though that's many of us are introverts. That's not a problem. I think like there you just got to recognize how you manage your energy. But I really enjoyed the learning aspect. And what I've seen in my DevRel career, a good chunk of folks turn up to the community to learn. Do you know what I mean? Either they've got immediate goals of I need to use this framework and I like this community seems like they're, like for sale, like, oh, Next.js or whatever, like this community is really going to teach me. Or they're more in it, they want to see bigger picture or they want to be part of something bigger like OpenJDK. Kubernetes would be a good example, right? Like Adidi Young on my team, she joined the shadow release team, like she saw the sort of bigger picture, these kind of things, right? And she was part of that Kubernetes community and did all her CNCF certifications and things. So I think there's an inherent sort of yearning in us to be part of something bigger. And I think particularly with developers, that revolves around learning.
Yes, absolutely, and truly, absolutely agree with you what you actually said. Because I think what happened is without joining the community, what happened is, let's say you work on an open source project, let's say Kubernetes, and you setting up an Ingress controller, and as you set up, there are few troubleshooting scenarios pop up. You see some errors appearing on the screen. Rather in, I think, 2010, 2011, 2012, when I started my journey, I go into the OpenStack, Stack Overflow, and then the
Yeah,
Google
right.
answer. And sometimes things works, and sometimes
Yeah,
things doesn't work
true.
because machine is them actually using his Windows, and the answer is actually for the
Yeah,
Mac.
yeah.
It's very tough. When you go into the community, it's 100, 1,000 people in there,
Yeah, yeah.
and 50% might be having the same machine, same error. If not one person answering your question, there might be three, four other who can give you the pinpoint to the question. And you feel very relaxed because these are not robots, not a written, but these are the human you
Yeah,
interacting
yeah.
with.
Yeah.
That's the super important of the developers community is. And I think with companies who build out some sort of investment, actually they are living the space of the Kubernetes and open source. But now the another question we can actually delve into: why do companies invest in developer communities?
Yeah, and I think if we're honest, there's two answers to this, Sam, right? There's always the altruistic, like a lot of us who create companies or are leaders in companies, we want to bring people along on the journey, whether that's your individual team or the community at large. So there's definitely that aspect of it. Undeniably, many of us are running businesses. There's a business aspect to it as well, right? I want you to use my products. Like if you're looking at Service Mesh or Gateway API Gateway, when I was in Master Labs, I wanted you to look at my product, right? So I recognized that, or we recognized, I should say, the whole team recognized that a big part of the technology you choose is the user experience. To your point, it's the community experience. Can I get, interesting people supporting me on this journey, right? So I think that's a key thing with companies investing. Often it will start out as a way to sort of generate buzz, generate noise, get some interest, bottom up interest. The developers, the platform engineers, the QA folks, the folks that are actually doing the work, bring them into your orbit. Oh, we're building on Envoy here. Like let's educate folks around the Envoy proxy, or pick your technology, right? And then you do realize that some of these folks, just by sort of the nature of it, become customers. Do you know what I mean? They really like the community. They get a lot of help. They're like, hey, I'm not paying for this. This is really good. I want to support you folks. Can I give you money? Can I buy licenses? So there's always that sort of business aspect to it as well. There is a sort of natural sort of pipeline or funnel, as we call it, where folks are like, I really like what you do here. I'll pay you money. And some of them, it's more an awareness thing. They don't want to pay us money, but like they want the support. So they do eventually pay you money, right? Those kind of things. And I think that's the two aspects. And I think it's really important as a DevRel leader not to lose sight of both of those. It's very tempting, done it myself, I think at times, where you do lose sight of one of them. If you lose sight of the business aspect, often you get a lot of pushback from your leadership. And we're seeing this sadly with the layoffs and things like that. People are saying, how do you justify the impact of DevRel? And that's something to always keep your eye on the prize in terms of like when you're part of a business community, should we say, or a community that's backed by a business, you do have to recognize that business aspect. But you must also never lose sight of you're building the community for the people, exactly as you said, Sam, right? It's really important. If you're just trying to monetize people, well, that's an audience. That's not a community. It's one-way conversation. It's transactional. Not a good look in general, right? So I think always bear those two things in mind. If you're a professional DevRel, it's a bit different if you're a hobby DevRel, but if you're a professional DevRel, there's always that community people aspect. There's always that business aspect too.
Yes, absolutely. And I think like if some, I think that we can kind of look at it because let's say if you are actually using some of the product today, what are the different support the company is actually providing you? It's 24 by 7. Let's say you can
Mm.
actually email them and then your query will be resolved, or you can actually answer them on their Slack or some other places, your query resolved. But you see, you talking to the same set of individuals all the time, and it's a product and the customer relation, and it can be break anytime, and you switch to the another customers, another layer, and both of the parties is actually losing grains of gaining the knowledge how to effectively provide a feedback that companies can improve upon. When you
Yeah,
build
great
out a
point.
community, I believe is a trust factor. that you
100%.
see. It's not me and Ambassador Lab or me or VMware Tanzu people speaking. It's bunch of other folks as well. And
Agreed, 100%.
sometimes it's a very useful conversations. It's a conversation that help the product team make a better solution, and
Totally, totally.
otherwise that is truly difficult to understand what the customers want. So if kind of a look, if you do an investment in a right direction, I think there's a big win in there. But I think that's where the discussion, the most important discussions start. We started off the why do developers join communities? We're talking about companies, why they invest in developer communities. Now the next layer of the question is when, how, and why to build a developer relations team.
You're asking the easy questions today, Sam, right? This is a hard question. I think I'm guessing most of us watching are from developer tooling companies or platform tooling companies, ops tooling companies.
Yes.
So the answer is going to be different than like if there is sometimes companies where the developer market is kind of secondary, and there the answer would be different. But if you're mostly working in the CNCF space, as you and I do, and other places, I think you need to always have an eye on DevRel, even from the company formation moment. Do you know what I mean? You always, because bottom line, the customers are going to be developers, are going to be platform engineers, QA folks. So whenever you start a company, you've got to build an amazing product. To your point, you've got to listen to feedback, make sure the product addresses the pain point, but you've got to let people know about the product, right? You've got to let people know about the pain points. So I think you're always doing DevRel. And if I look back at my time in Ambassador Labs, I was there roughly 6 or 7 years. I was advising at the start, and then I went sort of full time. And I was doing DevRel pretty much from day zero. But the folks around me were like, I think I was employee number 8. The founder was clearly doing a bit of DevRel. Like he was going to conferences. He was creating conferences actually in the Bay Area in the US. He was running these meetups, these conferences. So like that's kind of DevRel, even though he was the CEO. He's not, DevRel leader, right? But when I joined, I started doing a lot of articles and going into the community. So that like the DevRel function is always present, even if we don't label it as the DevRel team, if that makes sense. Because I think initially was brought on as a product advisor, not really DevRel, but I think the key inflection point for us was when we were getting, a reasonable amount of cash in the bank, like the product, we had what we call product market fit. So like there was clearly a demand for the Ambassador API Gateway, telepresence, all these other products we had. And that's when we decided to level up, not just DevRel in fairness, we leveled up many other parts of the company, but we made it more formal. And I'd say it's roughly 3 years ago, I think it was, where we spun up the DevRel team. And we had, I think, a second round of funding, Series B funding. And my remit from my boss at the time was drive this amount of impact in the community. We wanted like folks, X number of folks trying the products. We wanted Y number of folks succeeding and maybe like entering our sales pipeline, these kind of things. And they were like, give me a plan on how you would build the team. And I was like, well, ideally, like we've got 2 main products, so I want 2 specialists, so like a DevRel generalist but specialist in the product. And I was like, I would love to do lots more writing, but my time is limited. Can I get a technical writer? Boom. And we already had someone doing an amazing job in the company at sort of community type things, managing the Slack channel, that kind of stuff. So she came over to my team as well. And that for me was a perfect kind of startup-y vibe. Again, the company at this point was only about 50 people, but it was a perfect kind of combination of me being the leader, so me sort of seeing what the business wanted, to some degree shielding some of the folks I was working with for some of the craziness, right? We get the business craziness, right? And that was my job, but also listening very closely to my team about what they were seeing in the market. And to your point, many times I'd go, that's super interesting, that bit of feedback from the community, pass that on to product. So I was often doing a kind of air traffic controller job where I was like routing interesting things around. I wasn't the one necessarily doing the work, because like people like Adidong and Dave and other folks, Peter along the way, were doing the work, but they were saying to me, hey, I'm seeing these things. And that team, sort of like the 4 folks I mentioned, 5 folks, scaled quite for a long time. It's only I moved on from Ambassador Labs last year, but at that point, as the company's getting bigger and bigger, really we were looking to keep that kind of shape of the team, but perhaps make it bigger. So like product specialists, generalist writer, generalist community person, was a really nice kind of general shape of the DevRel team. And I think the key thing when you're looking to, when your team are saying, hey, I'm really overloaded, like every KubeCon, we used to touched the limits of our capacity, right? You know, I remember a few times I was feeling super stressed, and poor Didion, who was like, Didion ran KubeCon EU, I think, for me last year, and like she did an amazing job, but I could just see like we were really like pushing on the limits of her like time, right? Dave was running all the OSS stuff for me at KubeCon, and he was just like, I can't do it all, and I'm like, right, if we want to do more, we need more people. It's not fair on my team to like, you know, we burst occasionally, so to speak. We like in terms of like CPU bursting, right? We burst the limits occasionally. People sort of give up a bit of their own time if they can, but then after that, we sort of compress down, more time for the family, more time to chill out, maybe go on vacation, right? You got to look after your team. But that was a cue for me that hey, if we want to do bigger and more events, I've got to scale the team.
Yes, absolutely. Totally agree with what you actually I said. And I think like if you look at the ecosystem after 2014 and 2018, I think there's the when the companies become boosted as the community and the companies adopted Kubernetes in production. That we see a lot of the companies that never ever contributed in open source, they start contributing into it. And then see, we have some sort of expertise in our team that can contribute in the Kubernetes project. But now, why not we can create some product based on our contribution in the upstream version of open source project we have got. So that's where you need to tell the audience we are in the space of 1 million people that actually implementing and contributing in the wide spectrum of upstream open source software. So that's where you need a team that tell the truth. And also I think like when you start up contributing, there is a 1-2 spectrum, and that's a very two different question came up on my mind right now. Like some companies have an open source and nothing on between. It's
Yep.
just an open source. And then they start, then they actually climbing the ladder, and then they make a product that is based on that open source project. And
Yeah,
then they
yeah.
give it 24 hours services, 24 by 7 as enterprise offering. What is DevRel for those team? And what is DevRel for those team is like who don't have any open source project, who companies have wasn't the full customer list, they never contributed to the open source. But whenever they go to the conference, they see we are isolated. Nobody want to speak with us. There's only customers and only me. Nobody know what to do. How do we tell people that we exist in the ecosystem, we're contributing into it, and then they make an open source project. And what their idea was to make this open source project be a booster for their commercial offering.
Yeah.
So open source based company versus enterprise heavy company. What are the two different personas for their DevRel ideas?
Yeah, interesting, Sam. So I think the sort of first one you mentioned is kind of what we call the open core business model. So like you have an open source project. We did it at Ambassador Labs. We had what we eventually donated to the CNCF as emissary ingress. It was called Ambassador API Gateway before and a few other things, but it was emissary ingress. And then we had that was the core, and we wrapped on Ambassador Edge Stack on the top. Again, a few different names there, but that's a very common model amongst service mesh vendors, API gateways, many other things, right? And there, to your point, it is a bit easier as a DevRel because if you want to only talk about the open source, you can. Do you know what I mean? I went to open source conferences, my team did as well, and they were very clear. Like, if you're submitting a CFP, there's no mention of the commercial aspects.
Yes.
CNCF, KubeCon, they say the same thing, right? Talk about the open source. Mention by all means, perhaps once that there is a commercial product, but the focus of the talk should be on the open source. So that kind of made our job somewhat easier. The challenge often there was from a business perspective, linking up the open source with the commercial. Because we were there to educate folks, but we were also there to drive the business forward. Do you know what I mean? So we did have to be very careful about creating content and sort of poking and pointing folks in the direction of the commercial. And if like sometimes folks looked at the commercial, it wasn't for them, no problems. Do you know what I mean? But we had to create that avenue. So I think open core, you've always got the open source to talk about. You've always got the open source community. The tricky bit is the sort of bridging into the commercial world. To your point, where
Yes.
you're in the other space, where you've got, say, only commercial closed source products, you have to really focus on what you can build with that tech. because you can't really
Yeah.
talk about the tech itself, right? Because like, hey, it's proprietary, no one can see it, and like you can't have perhaps lots of input into the actual product, but you can have input into what you can build. And maybe you can have input into the APIs, things like that. Do you know what I mean? So I've seen some folks who are delivering their products via APIs, like a message service, like sort of, I'll say Twilio, right? But you know what I mean, that kind of company. Maybe a whole bunch of their stuff's proprietary, but the DevRel folks can say, hey, with these APIs, you can build all this cool stuff. Do you know what I mean? So you're not focusing so much on the open source, you're focusing on the potential you can build with the tooling. And that comes with its own challenges. Like the commercial angle is really obvious there, because like, if you want to build stuff, you may have a few free API calls, but after a certain point, you're gonna have to pay for the API probably, right? But it is possible to focus on, let's say, things you can build, sort of that's the open part of it, right? It's not open source, you can't look at the code, but you can look at the code of the demonstration the demonstration projects, the sort of sample apps you're creating.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's where I live in the last year as well. Like the companies that has not open source, but is a customer heavy, enterprise heavy, and they kind of are shielded away from open source because they don't have one. And they have a seized a very much pain point, like nobody talking to us. We feel very depressed every time we go to the
Oh no,
KubeCon.
yeah,
How do people bring into the conference? And that's where it's a tricky.
it is,
That's
it is.
where I believe a lot of layoffs happening. If you live in the open core business model, things were easier because top tier to the bottom tier, you know what is you're doing. And a lot of the feedback as a developer relations and the team is getting from the top layer. Oh, we want this open source to do this thing. It's your job to do it, how to do it. We're not good at it. You are best out at it. But all I want this project become an influencer in the front of my company's customers' eyes and plus in the community's eye. That's a very easy because you already have a roadmap clear and enjoy the life if you live in that spectrum. But you are in a different spectrum. It's tough because sometimes you need nobody has to tell you because to be honest, that the company doesn't know how to sell a product with developer relations personas. It's difficult. So sometimes you make your own decision, but what happens is the top management actually decide are you doing good or
Yeah.
wrong. And then you make a point. Oh, you haven't tell me that I am responsible for these four things.
Yeah.
How do you account me that I have done wrong? So that's where a lot of I see the segregation between the thoughts and opinion in the company's mind. But I think it's a tough word. And
Yeah, agreed.
sometimes general is a cultural shift. Like it's not a
Yeah.
one aspect. You need to shift a cultural thing. Like sometimes being a developer relations, you tell your seniors you have to do this and it's tough because they have a very limited capacity to either accept your opinion or either reject your opinion, and then you'd end up nowhere because if the rejection came up, then you don't have to then you bring up new plans and you creating plans nothing executed at the end of the day.
Mm.
It's tougher on the roadmap that you haven't done anything. So it's life is tougher, don't worry about, but you learned a lot of the different angle as well. And I think that's where this question is very vital to answer, that who owns the DevRel team and how to create a DevRel messaging flow cycle, because it's somewhere along the software development life cycle and some companies own one of the SDLC process, and you need to communicate that only one messaging that you actually being owns, like something like Kyverno, a policy engine, or service mesh, an ingress controller. But the community, me and you, are actually is pretty much bottled now, neck down with all of the different SDLC problems. So first thing first, let us know who owns the DevRel team. Like,
Yeah, it's an interesting two-part question, Simon. So you definitely have to remind me of the second part. Who owns it? That definitely is dependent on the business and the business goals. I think, and again, this is just my experience, I've mostly seen DevRel teams in the marketing area, right? But I know many successful DevRel teams, particularly in larger companies, that work as part of engineering. Like if you go to the hyperscaler clouds, like a lot of the DevRel teams are embedded with the engineering teams for good reason, right? Because a lot of the DevRel folks are actually doing coding as well as they are going to the community and sharing stuff. I think in terms of like, oh, sorry, I've lost my train of thought there. What was it? It was yeah, Homes and DevRel team. Sorry. I think that marketing mostly, engineering's probably second, and then I also see some DevRel teams in product. Because to your point, Sam, like getting the feedback from the community is a key part of our job. We're not just educating, we're not just teaching, we are listening, right? It's really important. That's the difference between probably a community and an audience. With an audience, you are just broadcasting stuff. Like I think it's really important as DevRel to listen. And therefore, if you're trying to build your product and get product market fit, actually embedding the DevRel team in product makes a lot of sense, right? Because then like the sort of the collaboration between the product leadership and the DevRel team is really tight. So I think it depends on your business goals is where I'd go with that in terms of who owns it. I think the most important thing, and you've alluded to this in what you just said, is whoever's leading the team be super clear on the goals. Do you know what I mean? Whether they're engineering goals or whether they're marketing goals or product goals, whatever, because that's where I became the most stuck, was where I didn't understand my goals in the context of the company, or there was a bit of a misunderstanding between my boss and I. Do you know what I mean? He was like, "Oh, I want this," and she was like, "Oh," and then I was like, "Oh, I'm optimizing for different things." So I think the most important question, regardless of where you live inside an organization, because I love to work for startups. With startups, it's often very fuzzy who owns what. Do you know what I mean? What department is what? Particularly when you're small, everyone does all the things pretty much. But being really crisp, really clear on your goals and how you know when you've got there. So sometimes it is metrics, right? X number of blog page views, Y number of people in our Slack channel. You can start sort of quite basic and then get a lot more complicated. But I think aligning on those goals is probably more important than exactly who owns the team.
Yes, absolutely, super important. And I think I'm really happy at this moment of time because I have some similar feeling. And it's tougher to me to tell people what you actually just said. It's really make some smile on my face because I think what happening in the ecosystem is a lot of the DevRel guys who really concerned about low numbers in the Slack, no numbers in the webinar, low number the YouTube views, and low number in these Twitter spaces. I think that's one of the criteria to judge yourself you are doing bad or good or bad. And sometimes some companies don't demand you to be make sure that you have 1 million people in the Slack. They just want only 5 to 10% of the people who can just give you a feedback what they think about the project,
Yeah,
and they
yeah,
can clearly communicate into the product team. And as you said, a lot of the team is working entirely with the marketing team. What I
yep.
did in my previous company, I spent 60% of the time with the product team
Oh,
because they are the communicator with customers
mm-mm.
and I am the communicator in the public. Sometimes the communicator of the customers doesn't know what's happening in the community. And
Yeah,
if
yeah, yeah,
you know this solution exists, the product team can neatly communicate with the customers and might be this resolve the issue. And
yep.
then sometimes the customer has more way better opinion than the community because community is far way abstracted with the
Yeah,
noisy
super
words
interesting.
and the buzzwords, and the customers have the real knowledge of the business. So I think another very frustrating to see that a lot of the companies and the folk investing solely on the marketing angle and
Mm-mm.
losing the prospect of the product angle as well. Very few companies I know who developer relation start communicating with the product team. Another, I think one
Yeah.
of the I speak with one of the person in the past podcast. He said like developer relations are wonderful guys. They speak and listen to everyone, but not within the company. They not speak any one person
Yeah,
with the
it's
company.
an interesting point.
That's frustrating. That's really frustrating to see like you because you are the communicator that brings feedback to the internal company's employee and
Yeah,
the
yeah.
product and the marketing, and you need to communicate as well. Now, I think I need your opinion because we have to answer the second part of the question: how to create the DevRel messaging flow cycle.
Yeah, what exactly do you mean by this, Sam? Like in terms of how sort of the product messages flow through the organization? Like, is that what you're after?
Yes, I think like we can drill down to one specific. Let's say you have a emissary ingress in your product.
Yeah,
Then you have a product mindset, you have an open source, and then you have a business offering as well. So
yes.
sometimes you just do only the open source side of thing, and then the
Gotcha.
companies tell you
Yeah,
shift towards product
yeah.
market.
Yeah, and this is constant collaboration, particularly amongst the leadership levels, right? And I think there's always some aspect of I listen to my leadership like team that are above me, and they said, this quarter we're optimizing for number of logos or ARR, annualized revenue, that kind of thing. Um, but then I always sort of pushed back a little bit as well because I was like, you can't just optimize for number of users like in the community. Like we've got to be, to your point earlier, we've got to be true to our community. We've got to be authentic because the moment we start going, trying to monetize everyone, we're going to get pushback, right? People will be
Yes,
like, this is not a community, it's like a sales room, right? And then everyone just walks away. So there was definitely me listening in terms of like, we're steering towards this product, we're steering towards this use case. Maybe we're going after banking or gaming or whatever, right? Sometimes we had like vertical targets, we called it. There was definitely me listening to that. But then also me pushing back a little bit too in terms of that. I mean, that's sort of the gift and the curse of being a middle manager like I was. Like you've got to shield the team a little bit, but also listen a lot to what the goals are of the company, the bigger leadership, but also listen to your team, what's coming up in terms of the community wants this or would value this or doesn't like this. And as a leader, as a middle manager, you kind of have to figure out like the happy medium there. And then the key thing, and I'll echo it again, is once you've got that alignment amongst all the folks there, try and storyboard it, try and write it down, try and put clear metrics, because the best success my team and I had was when everyone was super clear on the messaging flow. We're
yes,
focusing on the WAF, like web application firewalls. We're focusing on the web application firewall thing of emissary ingress for the banking domain. Here's how we're going to approach it. Here's the measures of success, and here's the kind of metrics we're going to feed back to the business. And like my team went, oh, that looks great, super clear, new target audience. I'm going to learn about WAF, da da da. And the business were like, oh yeah, great, I understand what you're trying to do. You're trying to target this vertical with this messaging. Everyone was happy. And if stuff goes wrong, inevitably it does, you can look back and say, where did we go wrong? Did we not set the right goal? Did we not execute the plan properly? Were we too overambitious with the numbers? But it's a much easier conversation that way around when someone just goes, make noise about API gateways. Do you know what I mean? Because I've had that direction in the past as a sort of messaging flow. The company's like, make noise about API gateways. And I'm like, cool, but like, how do I know if that worked? And they're like, just make some noise with customers, right? And I'm like, no. DevRel does not work like that. It's a bit more sort of, you need to be a bit more experimental, right? A bit more systematic in your approach. But I think that hopefully that addresses your question, like having those conversations, collaboration, as you rightly said, perfectly said just a moment ago, it is building the connections internally to the product people, to the customer service people, all the folks where you can share and learn from, building those collaborations, listening to the goals that are coming down. Hopefully that your goals aren't changing much in a quarter, hopefully, and then being super clear on the plan, executing it, and then retrospecting at the end, going, did we do well? Did we meet our goals? What was the problem? That I think is, and then feeding that back into the whole team. That's the best way to get this flow going, I think.
yes, absolutely. And I think like in the last company, what I did was I tried to create some sort of documentation. What
Love it.
I literally like 15 days and 20 days of interaction with the community. I
Yeah, yeah.
literally write down something and then share with my product team. Oh, you talking about like people having some struggling point in the policy and the compliance angle, but I don't seem to see it because it all just you need to do is actually create a Kyverno open source project, and then your compliance and security some sort of being critically much more stronger than it's before. So it's difficult in the product spectrum that people can buy a product that having some sort of 2 to 3 layers of security and compliance. That's my messaging is. So Then they understand, oh, yes, few words you have speak about is not you are clear, but few words you have already clear. Let's we have an internal discussion going on. That's not happening. That's not happening anywhere. It's, I think that's the toughest job we have as well. And I think, like as you mentioned, the messaging, you have to concrete with the
Yeah.
top to
Yep.
bottom
Agreed.
with the messaging flow. Because if let's say you creating, your company is creating some sort of template for Terraform or Paromi or the crossplane, and you communicate on the public around like Kubernetes API, that is going to be a different story. You need to bridge those together, like how the Kubernetes API correlate with Terraform templating, that the messaging become very simple and orchestrated. It's tough. Sometimes you need to feel very hard debate and a very fiery debate, but no worries. But
Yeah.
it's a great point. Like people are actually listening to you as well. So I think we spoke about from the those angle, or living in a spectrum, doing job, creating messaging, writing content, and having some hard time in the company. Now, why now we spoke about for the persons who wanted to become a developer relations going forward. So that would, I think we definitely spend few minutes for. So why, number one, why? And the question is why
Why not?
not developer relations as a career professional?
Yeah, I like the way you phrase that, Sam. It's always good to ask why not as well, right? I think like many of us sort of just fall into it. Many of us do love the teaching and the learning aspect, and that's a good reason perhaps to become a DevRel. Because as you move up in your software development career, just as an individual contributor, as an engineer, there's always an aspect of teaching. You're often mentoring folks, right? You're teaching your, like the more junior folks as you move on through. So you can always do that. But I think many folks who get into DevRel want to take it a step further. They want to be able to tell stories. They want to be able to build communities and bring people along on the journey. So I think if that speaks to you, and I'll just say it again, you don't have to be an extrovert. Like I find it quite funny in some ways. Many of us on the community that you would think are not introverts are in fact introverts. We love being on a stage because it's a controlled environment. We're in charge, right? We're doing our thing on stage. We're actually not so happy not at the booth or like, off stage where it's all unscripted, right? So you do not have to be an extrovert. But I think you do have to love that learning or teaching. And maybe if you don't want to do talks, you can do like blog writing. You can be active in the community Slack, that kind of thing, right? You don't have to be a public speaker. You don't have to be a podcaster. There's many things you can all do there. But if that sparks your interest, I think that's a good signal for you entering a DevRel career, or at least giving it a try, right? You haven't got to do it permanently. I know many folks who go into DevRel for a couple of years, go back to engineering or do other things. Like even me, I'm doing like springboarding to sort of more product marketing type things. There's many things you can do afterwards. I say, why not do it? I think there is a danger of it's just like people think of it as just like engineering, but at fancy locations. I'm going to be at
Yes.
nice hotels. I'm going to be on aircraft flying business class, right? And sometimes there's a bit of that. But I've been stuck in the middle of Austin in Texas, and I've been stuck like Berlin one time, like desperate to get home and see the friends and family, right? And you're like or like that. I'm sure, and many of us in Denver have got crazy stories. So like you always see the best angle, like, and I try to do my best when I come onto these kind of shows. Like, there's always the rough times. Like, I have been stuck places. I've run out of money one time. My credit cards didn't work. Like, it's been pretty weird, right? So, like, it's not that. Like, if you really just want to build production level systems, probably DevRel isn't for you. That's probably the thing I miss the most is building like production systems. Like, I build toy applications now, like hello world at web scale kind of thing, as the joke everyone says, right? But it's not the same as running an app in production. It's not the same as being responsible for a tool. And I've made my peace with that. Like, I still miss it, right? But I've made my peace. But the folks where they've gone into DevRel and fallen out quite quickly, where they were like, oh, I just thought it was engineering and doing a few talks. And I'm like, no, it's a job, right? Like, there's just hard bits of any job. Do you know what I mean? So I think that's the thing I definitely say to folks. Like, if you just want to sit in a corner and write code or listen to business requirements and write code, I respect that. Probably DevRel is not a career to put high on your list of things to try out.
Yes, that's super agree with you, definitely. Because sometime I think what happening in some sort, some personal have some wonderful communication skills by birth or by nurture, and sometimes they don't have some sort of engineering and they don't want to be a developers for the entire
Hmm.
entire life. He wanted to do some certain different things as well. So he kind of, I think, oh, is very less engineering, more on the public front, but he kind of lose the spectrum. You can be effective in communicating tech if you have spent far amount of time in the technological spectrum, because
Yeah.
it's tough.
It's that
It's very,
empathy, Sam, right? I think I often say empathy a lot, in that, like, if I do advise folks coming out of college or university, be very careful about taking a DevRel job straight away. Just as you've said, I always recommend becoming an engineer, even just for a bit, because you build that empathy. It's very hard to be a DevRel without having any of the dev. That makes sense. Like, you need the dev and the rel. So I do. That's it's a really good point you make there, Sam. Like, I do think you kind of need to be an engineer. It's not mandatory. I know actually Microsoft have got some really cool DevRel folks that aren't engineers and they're just really good at what they do. But in the grand scheme of things, folks I mentor, I say it's much easier to develop empathy by doing the job of an engineer, developer, operator, whatever, first before you do the DevRel thing.
yes, absolutely, super agree. Because I think that's really, because I think it's a ladder. Because software development, if you work it, because some folks in my career is started from the software engineering, and then I start with the operational angle, then move into DevOps.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then I saw the very much interest in the open source, that we do not feel and entirely looking at the one screen all the time.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
some different things happening all
yeah.
different days. So it's a good way to engage. And then you see, well, now I have some sort of communication hurdles always in the company. Why not? I can gain communication skills internally or
Yep,
externally,
yep,
and
yep.
then come back in the company and see what other roles fit in for my need as well. So I think it's
Totally.
about testing. It's
Yes,
about
yes.
testing skills.
I love it.
As you testing your unit testing is good for the code, and unit testing is wonderful for your professional skills as well.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. I like that.
Absolutely. And now I think before I let you off, I think that's where I see a very lack of interest, and people don't have some good people to talk about. But who or how? Number one, who should I go to talk about how I can set my DevRel career goal? And number two, how I can tell you that I can set my career goal is because it's a matter of finding a person, and it's a matter of communicating with the person. So how do you answer those two questions?
Yeah, oh, these are deep questions. They're good questions. I think I would start if you've got a job and then typically a manager, like that would be a good place to start. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've been lucky enough to work with some amazing like DevRel folks over the years. If you haven't got that sort of within your company, I think looking to communities is really good. I've mentioned a few like folks. There's definitely a bunch of Slack communities. There's like other communities around as well. You can often find informal mentors there. The slight challenge with DevRel is there's not lots of senior folks. So I already do a lot of mentoring, and folks say to me, "Hey, can you mentor me?" And I'm like, "I'm really sorry, but there's only so many people I can kind of look after." And I see this with my other senior friends as well. So recognize you can reach out to us, and we'll do our best to like get back to you and help you sort of nudge you in the right direction with careers. But there's a lot more folks sort of beginning careers than there are senior in DevRel, and they're probably the same with many professions, but I definitely notice this in DevRel. So yeah, start internally, maybe look to the community, maybe look on the Slack channels, ask about some of the career goals. And then also do check out the books. There's I actually got them on my desk here. Buried away somewhere. The two books I recommend in DevRel space. One is Mary Thengvall's Business Relations, and the second one is the Business Relations there. They like if you haven't got access to mentors, because not everyone has, right? I have learned so much from books over the years, and both of these books talk about setting career goals and how you might level up. Do you know what I mean? Because there's the engineering side of what you do, creating more code, but then there's the business side, creating more impact, and then there's the leadership side of it. How do I enable other people to do these things? Does that make sense? How do I enable my team to do these things? So if you haven't got access to the people, I do think like the books are, never as good as people, as you rightly said. The people are what make it, right? Make the community. But the books are a good start for at least thinking what kind of skills you'll need, and not just individual skills, but skills, as you've already said, at a bigger level around communication. Because a lot of people say to me, do I need 30,000 followers on Twitter? Should I run a podcast, right? And I'm like, maybe. I don't know, right? But like, what are you optimizing for? And they want to, oh, I want to build my personal brand. I want to be seen as an expert in the JavaScript community. I'm like, cool, look at the JavaScript community, try and find an opening, try and find a niche. There may be no podcasts there, or there may be too many. So, like, if there's too many, maybe do a newsletter, maybe do something else, right? So, I think focusing at the bigger picture, if you can, it's hard when you start your career. I know I ask the same questions when I started my career, but if you can focus on the bigger picture skills, better engineer, better leader, better communicator, and then a rough sort of target area. I really like Go. I really like Kyverno. What, take your pick, right? Like then you can kind of dive into those things, and hopefully working with someone in the community, even better, they can help you sort of set a plan in action of how you might level up those things to reach your overarching bigger picture goals.
Yes, absolutely. And I think like pursuing a developer relations career can be good if you're speaking very often in the public. Because what happened to me in the past, whenever I started learning in the front end languages in Angular and the back end in the .NET. I learned something and then think, oh, it's is enough. It is so much
Yes,
I
yes,
learned
yes.
about. And then we start communicating in public. There are few questions you don't have answer. And then your
Yeah,
mind think, oh, what's happening?
yeah,
How
yeah,
do I miss it? And then you learn again. And then there are few more questions.
yeah.
Then you don't have answer. Then you learn again. And you understand by going forward, those person who asking those questions have 20 year of experience and you just started in a 4 year and then your mind relax. It's good. I'm answering those questions to the person who asking me that have a 20 year of experience. So I think that's where is a very good energy. And I think really echo the noise of the book because that way it's articulated in a way that you have a storytelling in your mind. You have
Yeah, yeah.
this thing, you are starting career from the this angle, that angle. So it's feel like you already covered as well. So I think we spoke about so many things and we definitely want you to conclude here. I think it's two angle. I definitely see developer relations from the two angle. Are you going from this open source core business model versus you the enterprisey business model where no open source, no communities, just customers and your company want you to give some boost so other people can talk about their product in public. So that's where you feel to gain a momentum and that you actually experiment, validate, and some failure and some successes tune you as you go.
Yep.
But setting up developer communities is vitally important. I don't think so. Those developer communities don't go anywhere because those are I love about because sometime I have some question around a mystery ingress or Kyverno or Istio. I go into the Slack channel, my answer is already been covered.
Yeah, it's kind of cool, right?
That's where, yes, that's where I don't see any of the developer communities going anywhere. I think we can debate in the next few years, like, is developer relations a 10-year old like role, or is
Hmm.
going away after 2 to 3 years? We don't know. Might be there's something comes up, but we do know, irrespective of what this role is, a communication challenge is necessary. It's going to be present today, and even our kids suffering from the same disease of the effective communication challenge because you need to tell your people like this is a product, it do this, it doesn't do that. You need to fill in the gaps what it doesn't do
Yeah, yeah.
that. And
Yep.
when you do it, then you need to communicate we already have those ingredients in place that are missing in the previous year. That's where I think the communication challenge still be a hurdle, and the messaging flow is difficult to get because there are so many orchestrator, so many like in terms of that you need to communicate with your top peers, middle peers,
Yep.
and the low tiers, and you need to communicate the messaging, and then you have to agree or accept or reject and have to debate
Yeah, yeah.
upon it.
Agreed.
But it's no hard. We haven't covered all of the different things, but I want Daniel to actually give us 5 takeaways on DevRel.
Fight, you put me on the spot here, so this is good. So I do think probably trying to iterate on what we said earlier on is establish empathy. So understand your customers. That's a really important one, right? And our customers are developers. So like building empathy with like not only developers but your community at large is really, really valuable. So that's one takeaway. The second takeaway, I'm going to say be super clear on the business and the community goals. At the start of our conversation, we said there's often a healthy tension, hopefully, between those two things, right? So be super clear on that. The third takeaway, I will say constantly seek feedback in everything you do, right? So, I'm a big fan of whatever you're doing, create a hypothesis around it, do some experiments, get some metrics, collect some data, iterate on that. I think that's really, really a key thing. Fourth would be seek mentors, even if they are just books. I consider some books my mentors, right? As well as I'm very lucky to have actual like real mentors as well. I'm super privileged in that regard. But do seek out advice from Twitter, LinkedIn, blogs, books, Slack channels. Like, I think it's really important to stand on the shoulders of giants, right? Like I mentioned Kelsey Hightower, but like he genuinely is one of my heroes because I just see what he does effortlessly, doing demos or doing talks without slides. And I'm like, one day I would love to be like that, right? I'm lucky enough to know Kelsey and got some advice from him, and like he's as advertised. So yeah, seek out mentors, seek out advice. And the fifth one, what should we say for the fifth one? Make sure you're happy, right? Like try some DevRel stuff. If it doesn't work for you, no harm, right? You can go back to being an engineer or to a product person, QA person, whatever it is. I think I've definitely seen some folks stuck at careers, not just DevRel, but sometimes DevRel in particular, where they're not really happy. They had this vision of what it was like. They tried it and they're like, oh, it's not for me. I can't go back. And I'm like, yeah, you can. No one's going to really care, right? As in, like, I think it's like imposter syndrome. It's more important to you than it actually is sort of the other people. So, do always seek advice from people. But if you're not happy in the role, move on to something else. No harm, no foul. But if you liked what we've said in the conversation and you think DevRel could be interesting, give it a try, right? It might make you even happier. Like, I think you're the same, Sam, right? We genuinely we're privileged to be able to build communities and share our knowledge, right? That's amazing, right? Like, it's pretty awesome you can do that. So try it out. As in, what have you got to lose, right?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Janice. It's a great recap of all we actually have covered today. So I do call out Daniel. Daniel is also doing a podcast on InfoQ, very informative conversations, some very good technical deep dive. He writes some books, all of availables behind the scene, and also some wonderful blogs still present today on
On that note,
Ambassador.
Sam, can I shout out Avocado Bites? So folks are looking for avocadobites.co.uk. That's where I'm sharing all my DevRel knowledge. So it's a Substack newsletter doing a lot of things. The things we've talked about today, there's a bunch of blog posts on there. If folks want particular topics covered, hit me up on there and I'll try and write about them too. So thank you for
Yes,
shouting that out.
sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I will definitely include the link in the YouTube description. So, folks, don't forget to meet out as well. But it's a pleasure talking to you. And I encourage people to go into the InfoQ podcast because I educate myself a lot for some wonderful conversation you have with your guest as well. So, today's 100th episode, and we learned a lot, is a very important topic to understand. So, I think for my few conclusions are be able to understand like which spectrum you are is an open source course business model versus the enterprise heavy customer business model. Then number two is you need to communicate effectively every week internally and make sure you have listened to the feedback internally and externally and do a analysis what's best for you and create a reporting that you share internally within the product team and the marketing team and have
Yeah.
some sort of weekly calls or bi-weekly calls between product marketing and the native marketing team as well and make sure the messaging is already being drafted documented. Everybody can take a feedback, can stab out of it and provide a feedback and you open for the feedback and suggestion. And if you want to develop DevRel career, make sure is a communication give you a hell a lot of experience. You're able to meet with people like Daniel and a bunch of other as well. And if you want to switch to the different role, no hurry, no wastage, because you already learned how to be effective in communications. That will help you in other roles in the next career phase because communications challenge is always there, irrespective of where
Yeah,
spectrum
totally.
you are. So thank you very much, attentive listeners. Hope you enjoy the conversation. I will be looking forward to your chats on the YouTube description, on the comment side, and we'll make sure Daniel and I will actually answer those as well. And have a wonderful day. And we'll be meeting you again with another guest. Stay happy, stay healthy. Bye bye, and have a wonderful rest of the day.